Emma had always dreamed of learning English. Since she was a child, she admired people who spoke fluently. She imagined herself traveling the world, making friends from different countries. But in her small town, opportunities to practice were limited. She knew she had to find a way to achieve her goal. One day, she found an online course that promised fast results. Excited, she signed up immediately. The lessons were engaging, but she struggled with pronunciation. English sounded so different from her native language. Despite the difficulty, she promised herself she wouldn't give up. Her biggest challenge was speaking confidently. She understood words when reading, but forming sentences felt impossible. Every time she tried, she made mistakes and felt embarrassed. Still, she reminded herself that mistakes were part of learning. She kept practicing, even when she felt frustrated. To improve, she started watching English movies with subtitles. She repeated phrases out loud, mimicking the actors. Sometimes she didn't understand everything, but she loved the challenge. Her listening skills gradually improved, and she felt more motivated than ever. Emma knew learning English wouldn't be easy, but she was determined. She set a goal to practice every day. With patience and persistence, she believed she could succeed. Little did she know, this journey would change her life forever. Chapter 2: Facing the Struggles. Emma's enthusiasm remained strong, but challenges soon appeared. The grammar rules confused her, and she often mixed up verb tenses. She felt overwhelmed by the number of words she had to remember. At times, she doubted if she could ever be fluent. One day, she joined an online language exchange program. She was paired with a native English speaker named Jake. Their first conversation was nerve-wracking. Emma struggled to find the right words, and her pronunciation was shaky. But Jake was patient and encouraged her to keep speaking. Practicing with Jake became part of her routine. He corrected her mistakes gently, making her feel more confident. She learned new expressions that weren't in textbooks. Their conversations were full of laughter, and Emma started enjoying the learning process even more. Despite her progress, she still had moments of frustration. Some days, she felt like she wasn't improving at all. But then she remembered why she started. She reminded herself that every effort she made was bringing her closer to her goal. Emma realized that learning English wasn't just about memorizing words. It was about communication, connection, and persistence. She promised herself she would keep going no matter how hard it got. Chapter 3: A New Opportunity. One afternoon, Emma received an exciting email. A local company was offering a scholarship for an English immersion program abroad. The thought of studying in an English-speaking country thrilled her. But there was one problem. She needed to pass an interview in English. Nervous but determined, she began preparing immediately. She practiced answering common interview questions, recording herself to improve pronunciation. Jake helped her with difficult phrases and gave her feedback. Each day, she felt more confident. On the day of the interview, her heart pounded. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of how far she had come. The interviewer asked questions about her goals and experiences. Though she made a few mistakes, she spoke with confidence. She focused on expressing herself rather than being perfect. A week later, she received the news. She had been accepted. Emma couldn't believe it. All her hard work had paid off. She was about to embark on an incredible adventure that would change her life. Chapter 4: A New Beginning. Arriving in the new country was both exciting and overwhelming. Everyone spoke English so quickly. At first, she struggled to keep up with conversations, but she reminded herself that she was here to learn. Her classes were challenging, but she loved every moment. She met students from around the world who also wanted to improve their English. They helped each other, practicing every day. Speaking English became more natural with time. One day, she realized she was thinking in English without translating. It was a huge breakthrough. She felt proud of herself for overcoming her fears. She remembered the days when she was too shy to speak. Now, she was communicating confidently. Outside of class, she explored the city, making friends with locals. She forced herself to speak even when she wasn't sure if her grammar was correct. Every mistake taught her something new. She learned to laugh at herself and keep going. Emma knew she had a long way to go, but she had come so far already. She had proven to herself that dreams come true with hard work and determination. Chapter 5: The Journey Continues. Months passed, and Emma's English improved dramatically. She no longer hesitated when speaking. She even started helping other students who were struggling, just like she once had. One day, Jake visited her in the new country. Seeing her speak fluently made him proud. He reminded her of how nervous she had been during their first conversation. They laughed about it, realizing how much she had grown. Emma started thinking about her future. She wanted to use her English skills to help others. Perhaps she could become a teacher or work in an international company. The possibilities were endless. She realized that learning English had given her more than just language skills. It had given her confidence, independence, and new friendships. It had changed her life in ways she never expected. Her journey wasn't over. There was still so much to learn. But she knew one thing for sure. She would never stop chasing her dreams. Chapter 6: Overcoming Fear. Emma had been in the new country for a few months, and her confidence had grown significantly. However, she still felt nervous in certain situations, especially when speaking to native speakers in formal settings. One day, she had to make a phone call to schedule an appointment. Unlike face-to-face conversations, she couldn't rely on body language or facial expressions to help her understand. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number, afraid of making mistakes. When the receptionist answered, Emma struggled to express herself clearly. She mispronounced a few words and had to repeat herself several times. At one point, she even mixed up the days of the week. Frustration bubbled inside her, but she reminded herself to stay calm. After a few deep breaths, she slowed down and focused on making herself understood. Eventually, she successfully booked the appointment. It wasn't perfect, but she had done it. After that experience, Emma decided to practice speaking on the phone more often. She called customer service lines, made reservations, and even spoke to her classmates over the phone instead of texting. Each conversation became easier, and she felt less anxious. She realized that mistakes were not failures. They were opportunities to learn. Her breakthrough moment came when she had to give a short presentation in class. Standing in front of her classmates, she felt her heart race, but she took a deep breath and began speaking. Though she stumbled on a few words, she kept going. By the time she finished, her classmates applauded, and her teacher praised her progress. Emma felt a surge of pride. She had faced her fears and won. Chapter 7: Cultural Discoveries. As Emma continued her journey, she realized that learning English wasn't just about grammar and vocabulary. It was also about understanding culture. She started paying attention to idioms, slang, and the different ways people express themselves. At first, it was confusing. Phrases like hit the sack or break a leg made no sense literally. She often found herself asking friends for explanations. One day, she was invited to a family gathering by her friend Sarah. It was her first time experiencing a traditional holiday celebration in the country. As she listened to conversations, she noticed how people used humor and casual expressions. At dinner, she accidentally used a formal phrase in a casual setting, making everyone chuckle. Instead of feeling embarrassed, she laughed along with them, realizing that mistakes were part of the process. Emma also discovered that humor was an important part of communication. At first, she didn't always understand jokes because they relied on wordplay or cultural references. But as time passed, she started recognizing patterns. One day, she made a joke in English that made her friends laugh. It was a small victory, but meant the world to her. She began exploring different aspects of the culture: music, literature, and television. She read books in English, even if it took her twice as long as reading in her native language. She listened to podcasts, trying to catch every word. The more she immersed herself, the more natural English felt. Chapter 8: Hitting a Plateau. Despite all her progress, there came a time when Emma felt stuck. She wasn't improving as quickly as before, and it frustrated her. She could hold conversations, but she still struggled with complex discussions. Sometimes she felt like she was making the same mistakes over and over again. One afternoon, she sat in a cafe, feeling discouraged. Jake, who had been her language partner from the beginning, noticed her frustration. "You've come so far, Emma. Do you remember when you were too scared to even say hello?" He reminded her. She smiled, realizing he was right, but she still wanted to push herself further. To break through her plateau, she changed her approach. She started keeping a journal in English, writing about her thoughts and experiences daily. She also challenged herself to read more advanced materials, even if she didn't understand every word. Instead of avoiding difficult conversations, she engaged in them more often. Slowly, she noticed improvements again. She wasn't just speaking English, she was thinking in English. Complex sentences became easier, and she found herself expressing ideas more naturally. She realized that learning a language was like climbing a mountain. There would always be challenging moments, but every step forward mattered. Chapter 9: The Unexpected Challenge. Just as Emma was regaining confidence, she faced an unexpected challenge. She applied for an internship that required strong English skills. The position involved interacting with international clients, writing reports, and giving presentations. When she got invited for an interview, she was both excited and terrified. She prepared intensively, practicing answers and rehearsing potential questions. However, during the interview, nerves took over. She stumbled over her words and forgot a key phrase she had prepared. She left the interview feeling disappointed, certain she had failed. A few days later, she received an email. She hadn't gotten the position, but the interviewer praised her effort and encouraged her to keep improving. Instead of feeling defeated, Emma used this as motivation. She asked for feedback and worked on her weaknesses. Determined, she applied for another opportunity. This time, she approached the interview differently, less rehearsed, more natural. She focused on communicating her ideas rather than aiming for perfection. To her surprise, she got the position. It was proof that persistence and learning from mistakes were key. Chapter 10: A New Perspective. As Emma settled into her internship, she reflected on her journey. She remembered the girl who had once been too shy to speak, the girl who had struggled with pronunciation, and the girl who had feared making mistakes. Now, she was working in an English-speaking environment, something she had never imagined possible. One day, a new intern joined the company. She was in the same position Emma had been in at the beginning, nervous, unsure, and afraid to speak. Emma offered to help her, just as Jake had helped her before. Seeing someone else go through the same struggles reminded her of how far she had come. Learning English had given Emma more than just language skills. It had opened doors, introduced her to new cultures, and helped her grow as a person. She realized that fluency wasn't about speaking perfectly. It was about communication, connection, and confidence. Though her journey was far from over, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just a learner. She was someone who could inspire others. With a smile, she looked forward to the future, ready to take on whatever challenges came next. Chapter 11. Teaching to Learn. Emma's internship gave her a new perspective on learning. While working with colleagues from different backgrounds, she realized that language was more than just words. It was about connection. One day, her manager asked if she could help train a new intern from another country who was struggling with English. Emma hesitated at first. She still felt like she wasn't fluent enough to teach someone else. However, as she worked with the new intern, she discovered something surprising. Explaining concepts and correcting mistakes helped reinforce her own understanding. She found herself noticing grammar patterns she had never paid attention to before. The more she taught, the more she learned. Helping others made her more aware of the progress she had made. One day, the intern told Emma, "You're really good at explaining things. I wish I could speak English like you." Emma laughed, remembering how she used to think the same way about fluent speakers. She reassured her, "You will just keep practicing." At that moment, she realized how much her mindset had changed. Instead of focusing on what she still struggled with, Emma started appreciating how far she had come. She no longer feared making mistakes because she understood that learning was a journey, not a destination. Through teaching, she had gained a new level of confidence. From that day on, she made a habit of helping other English learners. She joined language exchange groups, participated in online forums, and even started a small blog about her experiences. Without realizing it, she had become an inspiration to others. Chapter 12. Thinking in English. One of Emma's biggest goals had always been to think in English. She had heard that fluency wasn't just about speaking. It was about having thoughts in the language without translating. But no matter how much she practiced, she often found herself mentally translating from her native language. Determined to change that, she made a conscious effort to immerse herself even more. She set her phone and computer to English, started journaling in English, and even spoke to herself when alone. Whenever she caught herself translating in her mind, she forced herself to rephrase the thought directly in English. At first, it was exhausting. Her brain felt like it was working twice as hard. But after a few weeks, she noticed a shift. One morning, she woke up and realized that her first thought of the day had been in English. It was a simple thought, wondering what time it was, but it was a sign that her mind was adapting. The more she practiced, the more natural it became. She found herself forming sentences more quickly in conversations. She no longer hesitated before speaking, and sometimes she even struggled to find the right words in her native language instead of in English. It was a strange but exciting realization. Thinking in English didn't mean forgetting her first language. It meant that she was truly internalizing the new one. It was a milestone that she had dreamed of reaching for so long, and now she was living it. Chapter 13, Facing Criticism. As Emma became more confident in English, she encountered a new challenge: criticism. Not everyone was encouraging. Some people pointed out her mistakes harshly, while others mocked her accent. At first, it hurt. She had worked so hard to improve, but there were always people ready to tear her down. One day, after receiving a rude comment on a language forum, she felt like giving up. If people were always going to judge her, what was the point? But then she remembered something an English teacher had once told her. People will always have opinions, but your progress belongs to you. Instead of letting negativity hold her back, Emma used it as motivation. She reminded herself that even native speakers made mistakes. She watched interviews of famous people who spoke English as a second language and noticed that even they had accents or occasional errors. Yet, they communicated effectively, and that was what truly mattered. She also found support in her community. Her friends, colleagues, and language partners reminded her of how much she had improved. Their encouragement outweighed the negativity. She decided that instead of focusing on criticism, she would focus on growth. Over time, she learned to ignore unnecessary negativity and embrace constructive feedback. She understood that making mistakes was a natural part of the process. No matter what others said, she was proud of her journey. Chapter 14, The Final Test. One day, Emma received an invitation to participate in an international conference for young professionals. She was thrilled, but there was a catch. She would have to give a speech in English in front of hundreds of people. It was the biggest challenge she had ever faced. Her initial reaction was fear. What if she forgot her words? What if her accent was too strong? What if people didn't understand her? But then she thought about everything she had overcome. She had faced her fear of speaking, passed interviews, and even helped others learn. She couldn't back down now. She spent weeks preparing. She wrote and rewrote her speech, practiced in front of a mirror, and recorded herself speaking. She even rehearsed in front of her friends, who gave her feedback and encouragement. Every day, she pushed herself further. The night of the conference arrived, and Emma stood backstage, her heart pounding. When her name was called, she took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. Looking at the audience, she felt a surge of confidence. She wasn't just a learner anymore. She was a speaker. As she delivered her speech, she spoke with clarity and passion. She made a few small mistakes, but she didn't let them shake her. When she finished, the audience applauded, and she realized something important. She had won not just the battle with English, but the battle with herself. Chapter 15, A New Beginning. After the conference, Emma's life changed in ways she had never imagined. Her confidence in English opened up new opportunities. She received job offers, invitations to events, and even messages from people who had been inspired by her journey. She decided to take things even further. She started making videos about learning English, sharing tips and experiences. People from around the world reached out to her, asking for advice. She realized that her struggles had turned into a strength. She could help others because she had lived through the same challenges. One day, she received an offer to work abroad. It was a dream job in an international company, and it required her to use English daily. Years ago, she would have hesitated, but now she knew she was ready. Without fear, she accepted the opportunity. As she packed her bag for her new adventure, she reflected on her journey. Learning English had been one of the hardest things she had ever done, but it had changed her life completely. She had gained not just a skill, but a new way of seeing the world. Standing at the airport, ready to board her flight, Emma smiled. This wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of a whole new chapter. Hello, my name is Josue. I am an English student, and this is my story. I want to tell you about my life in London. When I first arrived, everything was new and exciting. The city was big, with many people speaking a language I did not fully understand. I felt nervous, but I was also ready to learn. My goal was to speak English fluently, and I knew that living in London would help me achieve that. The first day in London was difficult. I went to a coffee shop and tried to order breakfast, but I could not say the words correctly. The cashier smiled and spoke slowly to help me. I felt embarrassed, but also determined to improve. I realized that speaking English every day was different from learning it in a classroom. I needed to practice more and not be afraid of making mistakes. I started my English classes the next week. My teacher was kind and patient, and my classmates were from different countries. We all had the same goal, to learn English. In class, we practiced speaking, listening, reading, and writing. I enjoyed the lessons, but sometimes I felt frustrated when I could not understand everything. However, I reminded myself that learning a language takes time and effort. Outside of school, I try to speak English as much as possible. I went to the park and talked to people, even if it was just to ask for directions. I watched English movies with subtitles and listened to English music. Every day, I learned new words and phrases. Slowly, I started to feel more comfortable speaking English. It was not perfect, but I was improving. After a few weeks, I noticed a big change. I could have simple conversations without feeling too nervous. I understood more when people spoke to me, and I could express my thoughts better. Living in London was helping me so much. My journey was not easy, but I was proud of myself. I knew that if I continued practicing, one day I would speak English fluently. Chapter 2, The Challenges. Even though I was improving, learning English was still difficult. Some days I felt confident, but other days I struggled a lot. There were moments when I could not understand what people were saying. I wanted to reply, but the words did not come out. It was frustrating, but I knew I had to keep trying. One of my biggest challenges was pronunciation. Some words were hard to say, and native speakers did not always understand me. My teacher told me to practice by listening and repeating words. I started to record myself speaking and compared it to native speakers. At first, it was strange to hear my own voice, but it helped me improve. Another challenge was grammar. English has many rules that are different from my native language. Sometimes I made mistakes and people corrected me. At first, I felt embarrassed, but I realized that mistakes were part of the learning process. I started writing in English every day to practice my grammar. Despite these challenges, I did not give up. I reminded myself why I came to London. Every day I told myself, I can do this. I kept practicing and looking for ways to improve. I knew that if I worked hard, my English would get better. Then, one day, I had a conversation with a shopkeeper without any problems. It was a short conversation, but I felt very happy. It was proof that I was improving. This small success gave me more confidence to continue learning. Chapter 3, Making Friends. One of the best parts of studying in London was meeting new people. My classmates were from different countries, and we all had different accents. At first, it was hard to understand each other, but we helped one another. We practiced English together and became good friends. I also made friends outside of school. I joined a language exchange group where people practiced different languages. I met native English speakers who wanted to learn my language, and we helped each other. Talking to them was difficult at first, but they were patient with me. Making friends helped me learn English faster. We spent time together, went to different places in London, and talked about many things. I learned new words and expressions that were not in my textbooks. Speaking with them every day made me more confident. Sometimes I still made mistakes, but my friends told me not to worry. They encouraged me to keep speaking. They said that even native speakers make mistakes sometimes. Their support motivated me to keep learning. After a few months, I realized that I was thinking in English more often. I did not need to translate everything in my head. I could respond faster in conversations. It was an amazing feeling because it showed how much I had improved. Chapter 4, Discovering London. London was an incredible city with many things to see and do. When I had free time, I visited famous places like Big Ben, the Tower of London, and Buckingham Palace. Each place had a history, and I love learning about them. Walking through the streets of London felt like walking through history. The old buildings, the red buses, and the sound of people speaking English everywhere made me feel like I was in a different world. I also enjoyed visiting museums and parks. The British Museum had many interesting exhibits, and Hyde Park was a beautiful place to relax. One day, I went to the National Gallery to see paintings by famous artists. I didn't understand everything, but I listened to the audio guide in English to practice my listening skills. Every experience in London was an opportunity to improve my English. One of my favorite experiences was going to a local market. There were many people, and everyone was speaking fast. At first, I was nervous, but I tried to understand what they were saying. I asked questions and practiced my speaking skills. It was a great way to learn English in real situations. I also tried different foods from around the world. London had restaurants with food from many countries. I learned the names of different dishes and practiced ordering in English. Another thing that helped me improve my English was taking the underground, or the tube, as people in London called it. At first, it was confusing because the system had many lines and stations. I had to read maps and listen to announcements carefully. Sometimes I asked people for help, and they explained things to me in English. Over time, I became more comfortable using public transportation, and my confidence grew. Living in London was not just about learning English. It was about experiencing a new culture and meeting new people. I learned about British traditions, like drinking tea in the afternoon and watching football matches. Every day was an adventure, and I was grateful for the opportunity. Chapter 5: My Progress and Future Goals. After living in London for a year, I looked back at my journey. When I first arrived, I was nervous and afraid to speak. Now, I could have conversations without much difficulty. My pronunciation was better, and I felt more confident. I could talk to shopkeepers, ask for directions, and even joke with my friends in English. It was an amazing feeling to see how much I had improved. Learning English was not just about studying. It was about practicing every day and not being afraid of mistakes. I realized that the best way to learn a language was to use it as much as possible. The more I spoke, the better I became. I used to be scared of talking to native speakers, but now I enjoyed having conversations. Even when I made mistakes, people understood me, and that gave me confidence. One of the biggest changes in my life was how I started thinking in English. At the beginning, I translated everything in my head from my native language to English. This made speaking slow and difficult. But after months of practice, I noticed that I could think directly in English. I no longer needed to translate every word. This was a big step in my journey to fluency. My goal was to speak fluently, and I was getting closer every day. I still had more to learn, but I was proud of my progress. I knew that if I continued practicing, I would become even better. I started reading books in English, watching TV shows without subtitles, and writing in English every day. These small habits help me improve even more. One of the most important lessons I learned was to be patient. Learning a language takes time, and it is okay to make mistakes. The key is to keep going and never give up. Now, I want to help others who are learning English. I know how hard it can be, but I also know that it is possible. If you practice every day and believe in yourself, you can do it too. My journey is not over. I still have more to learn, but I know that I am on the right path. One day, I want to travel to other English-speaking countries and continue improving. Learning English has opened many doors for me, and I'm excited to see where this journey will take me next. Chapter 6: Making Friends in London. One of the most exciting and rewarding parts of my journey was meeting new people. At first, I felt nervous about speaking in English because I wasn't confident enough and I worried about making mistakes. However, I soon realized that if I wanted to improve, I had to practice, even if it meant embarrassing myself sometimes. I started talking to my classmates, the staff at coffee shops, and even people in the park. To my surprise, most people were patient and kind. They smiled, corrected me when necessary, and encouraged me to keep speaking. One of the best ways to practice was making friends with other students. At my English school, I met people from different countries, all trying to learn English like me. We started helping each other by practicing conversations every day. We created small challenges where we could only speak English for an hour, and if someone used their native language, they had to buy everyone coffee. These small games made learning fun, and little by little, I became more comfortable. One of my closest friends was Tom, a British student who was passionate about football. We often met to watch games together, and during those moments, he would teach me slang words and British expressions. He explained how British people used informal language in daily conversations, which was very different from what I had learned in textbooks. In return, I taught him some words from my own language. Learning English wasn't just about grammar and vocabulary. It was about connecting with people and understanding their culture. To improve my speaking skills, I also joined a local conversation club. The group met every Saturday in a small cafe, and each week we talked about a new topic, such as travel, movies, or history. There were people from all levels, but everyone was supportive. The more I participated, the more I noticed my confidence growing. I no longer hesitated as much when forming sentences, and I stopped translating everything in my head before speaking. Looking back, I realized that making friends was one of the most important parts of learning English. Conversations with native speakers and other students helped me improve much faster than studying alone. I started feeling more at home in London, and for the first time, I truly believed that I could become fluent in English. Chapter 7: My Challenges and How I Overcame Them. Learning a new language is exciting, but it is also full of challenges. There were many days when I felt frustrated because I couldn't understand what people were saying. Sometimes native speakers spoke too quickly, using words and phrases I had never heard before. I often felt lost during conversations, and I hated the feeling of not knowing how to respond. It was discouraging, but I reminded myself that learning takes time. One of my biggest struggles was pronunciation. English words are not always pronounced the way they are written, and that confused me a lot. Words like through and those sounded completely different, even though they looked similar. To improve, I started listening carefully to how native speakers pronounce words. I watched movies, repeated sentences, and even recorded myself speaking to compare my pronunciation with the correct one. Little by little, I started improving. Grammar was another big challenge for me. English has many irregular rules, and sometimes they didn't make any sense to me. I often made mistakes, but I decided not to let them discourage me. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I used my mistakes as learning opportunities. I started asking my teachers and friends to correct me whenever I spoke, and I wrote down my errors so I wouldn't repeat them. Writing in English was also difficult in the beginning. I wanted to express my thoughts clearly, but I didn't always know how to structure my sentences. To improve, I started keeping a journal where I wrote about my daily experiences. Every night, I wrote a short entry about what I had done, what I had learned, and how I felt. At first, my sentences were simple, but with time, I became more comfortable with writing. Even though there were many difficulties, I never gave up. Every challenge made me stronger and more determined. I knew that if I continued practicing every day, I would improve. And slowly but surely I did. Chapter 8: Exploring more of the UK. After spending several months in London, I realized that I wanted to see more of the United Kingdom. England had many beautiful and historic cities, and I decided to take short trips to explore them. Traveling was also a great way to practice my English because I had to communicate with different people in new situations. My first trip was to Oxford, a city famous for its university. The old buildings and libraries made me feel like I had traveled back in time. I walked around the university, visited museums, and even talked to some students. I imagined what it would be like to study there, surrounded by so much history and knowledge. Next, I went to Cambridge, another famous university town. I took a boat right along the river and enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere. The city was smaller than London, but it had a special charm. I also visited small cafes where I practiced ordering food in English. Every trip became an opportunity to improve my language skills. One of my favorite trips was to Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland. The city had a magical feel, with a castle on a hill and streets full of history. However, I quickly realized that Scottish people had a very different accent from Londoners. At first, I found it difficult to understand them, but after a few days, my ears got used to it, and I was able to communicate better. Traveling taught me that English wasn't just something I studied in books. It was a real language that connected people. I felt proud that I could use my English skills to explore new places and interact with different cultures. Each trip gave me more confidence, and I started to feel like a true traveler, not just a student. Chapter 9, Becoming More Confident. As the weeks passed, I noticed a big change in myself. At the beginning of my journey, I was afraid to speak. I was always worried about making mistakes or not understanding what people said. But now, I could have conversations without overthinking. I could ask for directions, order food at restaurants, and even make small talk with strangers. One of the biggest moments for me was when I helped a tourist who was lost. He approached me and asked for directions in English. I listened carefully and explained the way step by step. A few months ago, I wouldn't have been able to do that. But now, I felt proud that I could communicate clearly and help someone in need. I also started noticing that I was thinking in English more often. Before, I translated everything in my head before speaking, which slowed me down. But now, my thoughts naturally formed in English. This was a big step in my language learning journey, and it made me feel even more confident. One day, my teacher told me, "Josue, your English has improved a lot. You should be proud of yourself." Hearing that made me incredibly happy. It reminded me of how far I had come since my first day in London. I still had a lot to learn, but now I was excited for the future. Learning English had changed my life, and I knew that it would open many new doors for me. Chapter 10, The Future and My Advice. Now that I had gained so much knowledge and confidence, I started thinking about my next steps. What would I do with my English skills? I realized that speaking English fluently would help me in many ways. It would open doors for better job opportunities, allow me to travel more easily, and help me connect with people from different cultures. But most importantly, learning English had given me a sense of achievement. It was something I had worked hard for, and now I could see the results. One of the biggest lessons I learned during my journey was that progress takes time. At the beginning, I often felt frustrated because I wanted to improve faster. I expected to understand everything after just a few weeks, but that was not realistic. Learning a language is like building a house. It takes patience and dedication. First, you lay the foundation by learning basic vocabulary and grammar. Then, you start adding structure with more complex sentences and conversations. Finally, you decorate your house by mastering pronunciation, slang, and cultural expressions. It's a long process, but every little step counts. If I could give advice to anyone learning English, it would be this: never be afraid to make mistakes. When I first arrived in London, I was scared to speak because I didn't want to say something wrong. But then I realized that mistakes are part of learning. Every time I made an error, I learned something new. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I started using my mistakes as lessons. The more I practiced, the better I became. No one learns perfectly from a start, and even native speakers make mistakes sometimes. Another important thing is to immerse yourself in the language as much as possible. I improved my English not just by studying, but by surrounding myself with English every day. I watched movies, listened to podcasts, read books, and talked to people as much as I could. Even when I was alone, I try to think in English instead of my native language. This helped me train my brain to use English naturally. Also, set clear goals for yourself. When I first arrived in London, my goal was simple: to be able to have a conversation without feeling nervous. Once I achieved that, I set a new goal: to watch an entire movie without subtitles. Then, I challenged myself to read a book in English. Every time I reached a goal, I felt more motivated to keep going. Learning a language can feel overwhelming at times, but if you break it down into small steps, it becomes much easier. One of my proudest moments was when I had a conversation with a native speaker and they didn't slow down or simplify their English for me. That's when I realized how much I had improved. I was no longer just a student struggling with words. I was a confident speaker who could communicate effectively. It was a feeling of accomplishment that I will never forget. As my time in London came to an end, I reflected on how much I had changed. When I arrived, I was unsure of myself, afraid to speak, and nervous about making mistakes. But now, I was leaving as a different person, someone who had embraced the challenge, pushed through the difficulties, and come out stronger. But my journey doesn't end here. Learning English is not just a temporary goal. It's a lifelong skill. Even though I have improved a lot, I know there is still more to learn. Language learning never really stops, and I am excited to continue improving. I plan to keep practicing, meeting new people, and exploring new places. If there's one thing I want to share with others, it's this: never give up. Learning a language can be hard, but if you stay committed and practice every day, you will improve. Believe in yourself, be patient, and enjoy the process. One day, you will look back and realize how far you've come, just like I did. And with that, my journey in London may be over, but my adventure with English has only just begun. Chapter 11. Returning home with a new perspective. Leaving London was a bittersweet experience. I was excited to see my family again, but a part of me wished I could stay longer. The city had become a second home to me, and I knew I would miss the streets, the people, and the daily challenges of learning English. When I boarded the plane, I looked out the window and smiled. My journey was not over. It was just changing. As I arrived home, My family welcomed me with open arms. They were eager to hear about my experiences, and I was excited to share them. My parents noticed that I spoke with more confidence, and my younger siblings looked at me with admiration. It felt good to be home, but I also realized how much I had changed. My mindset was different, and I saw the world in a new way. Adjusting back to my normal life was not easy. I had spent months speaking English every day, and suddenly I was surrounded by my native language again. I worried that I might forget everything I had learned. To prevent that, I made a plan to continue practicing. I set a goal to think in English and write a journal about my daily life. One of my biggest challenges was finding people to practice with. In my city, not many people spoke English fluently. I decided to join online communities where I could chat with English learners and native speakers. These conversations helped me maintain my skills and even learn new expressions. The internet became my classroom, and I was determined to keep improving. Even though I was back home, my English journey was far from over. I knew that if I stopped practicing, I would lose my progress. I promised myself that I would keep learning every day, no matter what. My experience in London had changed me, and I was not going to let my efforts go to waste. Chapter 12: Using English in Real Life. One day, I was walking through my city when I saw a lost tourist looking at a map. He seemed confused, and no one around him spoke English. Without hesitation, I walked up to him and asked, "Do you need help?" His face lit up, and he immediately started talking to me. At that moment, I realized how valuable my English skills were. Helping the tourist gave me a sense of pride and confidence. Before my trip to London, I would have been too afraid to start a conversation in English. Now, I could speak naturally and even enjoy the interaction. I wanted to find more opportunities like this, so I started looking for ways to use my English in daily life. I found out that a local company needed someone to help with international customers. I applied for the job, and during the interview, I spoke in English confidently. The manager was impressed, and I got hired. It was my first time using English professionally, and I felt proud of myself. It showed me that learning a language could create real opportunities. At work, I met people from different countries and learned about their cultures. Every conversation helped me improve my English and expand my worldview. I no longer saw English as just a subject in school. It was a tool that connected me to the world. Speaking English had become a part of my identity, and I loved using it. Using English in real life made me even more motivated to keep learning. Every new interaction was a challenge, but also an opportunity to grow. I knew that my journey with English was not just about fluency, it was about connecting with others and opening doors to new possibilities. Chapter 13: The Challenges of Maintaining Fluency. Even though I become fluent, I soon realized that keeping my English skills strong was not easy. At first, I practiced every day, but as time passed, I found myself speaking English less and less. Without daily practice, I started forgetting words and struggling with pronunciation. I needed to find a way to keep improving. I decided to create a routine that would keep me connected to English. Every morning, I watched a short video in English and wrote down new words. In the afternoon, I listened to podcasts while doing chores. Before bed, I spent 10 minutes writing about my day in English. These small habits made a big difference in maintaining my fluency. Another challenge was finding people to talk to. I wanted to keep practicing conversations, but in my city, few people spoke English fluently. I started using language exchange apps to chat with native speakers. It felt like being back in London, having conversations with people from different cultures. Talking to them helped me stay confident. There were times when I felt frustrated, especially when I forgot a word or made a mistake. But I reminded myself that learning a language is a lifelong journey. No one speaks perfectly all the time, and even native speakers make mistakes. The important thing was to keep going and not let small setbacks discourage me. Maintaining fluency requires constant effort, but it is worth it. Every time I had a conversation or understood something new, I felt proud. I realized that English was now a part of my life, and I would never stop learning. Chapter 14, my next big dream. After months of practicing English at home, I started thinking about my future. What was my next goal? Learning English had given me confidence and new opportunities. Now, I wanted to see how far I could go. One day, I had an idea. What if I studied abroad again? I began researching universities in English-speaking countries. I wanted to study a subject that would allow me to use my language skills. The idea of living in another country again excited me, but I knew it would not be easy. I needed to prepare, improve my academic English, and apply for scholarships. At first, the process seemed overwhelming. There were many requirements, and I doubted if I was good enough. But then, I remembered how I felt before going to London. I had been scared, but I had taken the risk, and it had changed my life. I decided that if I had done it once, I could do it again. I also wanted to help others who were learning English. I started tutoring students who struggled with the language. Teaching them made me realize how much I had learned. Every time I explained something, I reinforced my own knowledge. It felt good to give back and inspire others to keep going. This new dream gave me a sense of direction. I knew that learning English was not just about fluency, it was about growth, opportunity, and pushing myself to new heights. I was ready for my next big adventure. Chapter 15, a lifelong journey. Looking back, I could see how much I had changed since I started learning English. What began as a challenge had become a passion. English was no longer just a language. It was a part of who I was. It had given me confidence, independence, and new dreams for the future. Even though I had achieved fluency, I knew that learning never truly ends. There was always something new to discover. More words, new expressions, different accents. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, I saw it as an exciting journey. Every conversation was a chance to improve, every book a chance to learn. I also realized that the best way to stay motivated was to set new goals. My dream of studying abroad was just the beginning. I wanted to travel, meet people from different cultures, and use English in new ways. Maybe one day, I would even learn another language. But no matter where life took me, one thing was certain: I would never stop learning. The journey that started in London had transformed me, and I was excited to see where it would take me next. English had opened doors for me, and I knew it would continue to do so. My story was not ending, it was just beginning.